Alright guys, TouchCrabbit back again today. Hopefully enjoying your Tuesday so far, and we have a lot to talk about today, mainly the fact that Infinity Ward have just dropped a major nerf that will most likely affect the meta in competitive play. The interesting part, of course, this is really late in the season, right? A couple of months now till Champs, only 3 home series events left in the season. Pros aren't particularly happy about the timing of this one, but I suppose it could be worse given that usually we get these kind of updates the night before an event does kick off. We're going to talk about that today. Like if you guys enjoyed the video, subscribe if you're new as always. I would greatly appreciate it. Let's hop into things then. First of all, Booty Boost noticed this on stream yesterday with Minnesota Rockers brownie behind Gunless, so that kind of implied something maybe, but maybe not, because CDL Intel Crone over there says, looks like Alex is back in the starting lineup from this clip from Brian Saints, where as you can see in the top left of your screen, Alex is back in the starting lineup alongside the traditional few. Roster lock is coming next Monday, so still maybe some time for Gunless to get something sorted out, but it doesn't look overwhelmingly likely at this point. Great to see Alex back in the starting lineup indeed, because yeah, that's something which I definitely hope his thumb got better, and it seems like he's doing relatively solid in this one as well. So hopefully that does help Minnesota Rocket in future events. Let's talk about this MP5 nerf that comes in then. So a lot of things changed. The ground changed. I'm pretty sure a lot of this was based around Warzone. I don't think any of you guys would really be surprised if that was indeed the case. However, there are a few things that are going to affect competitive play here to at least some degree of severity. The first one being the MP5. Decreased damage range, decreased 10mm damage range as well. So when you have the 10mm attachment on your gun, which is pretty much what all the pros use, there was discussion at the time where they were GAing the Merc 4 grip that we should GA the 10mm rounds as well because they're too strong, they increase the range, all this kind of stuff. The damage range on them has been reduced long damage range to 10mm, slight recoil increase to 10mm ammo as well. So some pretty significant changes here. Definitely something has changed in terms of how the gun handles, but it might not be an absolutely overwhelmingly big deal. However, we have talked for a while that there's a couple of SMGs, notably the Uzi, maybe also the MP7, that are kind of nipping at the heels of the MP5 to be used in competitive play. We've seen the Uzi be used somewhat in the CDL, Invoice pulled it out, Classic was using it in scrims at the time. He's now on the sub bench, but we'll have to see what happens going forwards because the Uzi apparently is going to become a pretty popular gun in this upcoming meta because the MP5 has clearly got worse to some degree. Maybe it's still good enough to use in competitive play, but there are some other things here which are going to have another impact also. So the HGR and the AX50 got buffed, so Wiskin was saying, as we'll look at in a second, guaranteed one hit to the lower torso at any range now with the HDR, so that's definitely a step in the right direction for that weapon in terms of consistency. But this is something which maybe less people are talking about, but it's probably even a bigger deal than the MP5 nerf. That being the no stock attachment, increased weapon recoil, decreased ADS aiming steadiness. Now the no stock attachment is pretty much used on every gun in the game. Not all SMGs have it. For example, the MP5 has like an F-TAC collapsible stock, which basically does what the no stock attachment does, but it's not called no stock. Whereas guns like the MP7 and the Uzi both have no stock, and of course, most notably, the M4A1, the main assault rifle in the game, also has no stock, and pretty much all the other ARs do as well. And then there's a go-to attachment on that weapon, right? You put no stock on, you can move faster with little penalties in other regards. Now, increased weapon recoil with no stock, decreased ADS aiming steadiness with no stock, doesn't seem like it's going to be as viable as an attachment. So a lot of people are literally looking at this change, MP5 being nerfed, and thinking, well, damn, M4's going to take over the meta. There's going to be so many M4s running around the map. But maybe that's not the case, given that no stock has been nerfed, meaning you're probably going to have to use another stock on your M4 to ensure that you do have that, good recoil and good aiming steadiness, so your idle sway isn't all over the place with that main assault rifle. And if that is the case, probably going to have to be using a different stock attachment, which is going to slow you down. I mean, you can't just run 5 M4s or something, because, your team won't be able to have that level of pace. Then again, this also does affect SMGs to some degree, right? You would like to use a no stock attachment on your Uzi, on your MP7. Maybe that's not going to be as viable now because it's going to increase your recoil and make things more difficult at long range, where a gun like the MP7 actually does kind of shine at times. So definitely some questions here to see how this develops over coming days. But another discussion, of course, around this is the timing of this change, because a lot of people are saying that, look, if you were going to nerf the MP5, which a lot of people for a long time have said it needs to be done, right? Very powerful weapon. Definitely the dominant weapon in the meta this entire year. Been somewhat boring, to be honest, to see just MP5 and M4s all the time, every game. I've always preferred the games with better weapon variety, like Black Ops 3, Black Ops 4, for example, with the MattG, the ICR, the Sorg. We had the Swordfish at times, the Rampart, like a few guns were viable in that game. This game hasn't really been the case. But we look at the way the season's gone so far. We're only 3 home series events from the end of the season. Then we have the World Championships. A lot of people would have said that, like, if you're going to make a change that seems relatively drastic to the weapon meta, it should have happened somewhat earlier in the season, and exactly why they have done this is maybe up for contention, and some of the pros aren't particularly happy about the timing of this drop. Then again, you could say that, look, if they were going to do it between week 11 and 12, and there was like 2 days for them to practice with this new meta, at least there's a week plus for the pros to figure out what the meta should be in this for the upcoming events. Now, how much is it going to change? How many MP5s are we going to see anymore? How many Uzis are going to come into play? Is the MP7 going to come into play? Are we going to see the same out of N4s? Are we going to see more? Those are certainly questions that need to be answered over the coming weeks, and I'm sure they will be. But, you know, again, you could always say that there would have been better times for this update. Maybe if you just did it last week, gives the pros extra time to practice. Clearly, there just isn't the synergy, once again, between the CDL and Activision and Infinity Ward, the developers making these changes, and of course the pros that you would imagine would have some sort of input into what would happen here for a title which is, well, franchise, and there's a lot of money on the line, but clearly isn't the case. Pros aren't particularly happy about this. Scraps once again doubles down on kind of what he talked about yesterday with the online scene, talking about 4.6 million going to be online. You know, also the M4 is just as broken, should have left it how it was, talking about the no stock attachment being nerfed. Good time to show the world our Bison shot, so maybe that's going to come into play. Slasher says, how do we practice with these new changes, given that the spawns are supposedly different in the 12Hz servers that you can play in custom games to the 60Hz GB servers that you can practice on if you are a professional player. That's kind of what Trey's getting at here. But yeah, the pros not particularly happy with this has gone. Now I've got to get used to a new gun, probably with 1.5 months left before competing for a lot of money online. Scraps isn't too happy. And Ake says, I remember expecting this exact update in 2019, effectively saying that, like, look, this should have happened ages ago, and well, it's too late in the season now. Dylan says, would say I'm surprised, but I'm just not surprised. Like, Infinity Ward do these type of things, and exactly the reasoning for this you could talk about in a second here. So Sim says, getting used to a new meta in Pro 10s will be intriguing to see how it all develops. And it's quite a CDL Intel here says, well, just thought it was kind of funny. A lot of people were talking about this over the Reddit, right? Infinity Ward watching pro players using MP5 all year versus Infinity Ward watching Warzone streamers use the MP5. Kind of saying that, look, when the MP5 has now been used in Warzone, and is a pretty popular weapon in that part of the game, then Infinity Ward step in and make some changes. But you know, the pros talking about it for the entire year hasn't made one little speck of difference, right? You could certainly argue that that is a reasonable outcome for why Infinity Ward have made this change now rather than earlier in the season. So let's talk about exactly what the direction could take for the meta. Whiskin says, get the Cuban cigars out. Champs is a wrap, talking about how the HDR has been buffed. And let's talk about this MP5 then. So pre-update, post-update, supposedly it looks somewhat like this. I put these red lines on to make it clearer because not exactly equal on both sides, but this is with the 10mm rounds, I imagine, and the increased recoil that supposedly is being shown. So this red line comes from this dot over on the right hand side here, which is supposedly, well, it looks to me the same on both sides. Pre-update, it would pretty much go up to the line. Now it goes quite significantly over, so clearly a pretty significant increase in recoil here. One could say that, look, well, maybe you pull out your Cronus Max, you get the anti-recoil hacks on that, and you're going to be shooting as straight as ever, right? So that maybe is something to be considered, that even players that are potentially using those hacks, it might be even more beneficial now to use those cheats that we discussed, because the recoil is now going to be increased on the MP5. So yeah, you can talk about that. Is this going to make an overwhelming difference? But to be honest, this change and the other changes of Sin, such as the reduced damage range and all of this kind of stuff, probably adds up to the fact that we are going to be seeing some new SMGs in competitive play. Slack says Uzi is the meta trust, so he thinks it's coming into play. Then you've got Envoy saying MP5 nerf, about time, so he reckons it's going to be happening as well. Then we've got Awakening saying, no way I'm using an Uzi, bro. So we'll have to see how it goes, right? You know, you'll be straight, you got that Cronus. I am intrigued to see how this goes. Some pros clearly pretty happy to use the Uzi and give it a go. That was the meta, that was the gun that was really coming into the meta before all this change happened a few weeks ago now. Envoy especially was pulling it out, as we talked about Clayster as well, but clearly Awakening isn't too happy with using this one, and maybe the MP5 will stay in the meta in some great capacity. The MP7 was talked about earlier this season as well, but no one really is discussing that too much great degree now. And as Easy Max says, the no stock nerf is bigger than the MP5 nerf. Honestly, slows down the game a lot and makes ARs less aggro. Going to be interesting to see the pace so slow and Uzis everywhere. I doubt the no stock nerf is anywhere near as bad as the MP5, probably being unusable. Always another sub. This just slows down all ARs. So interesting back and forth here on Twitter. Have to see how this develops over the coming days. Intrigued to hear your thoughts down below as always. And as Attach replies to Crone's tweet here, 5 M4s. I just personally doubt that will be the case. Given this no stock nerf, I don't think M4s will be particularly viable, at least running multiple of them. You're going to need your pacey guy to go in first regardless, but will no stock still be viable on a weapon like the Uzi or the MP7 to be able to compete with that MP5? Have to see how things go in coming days. Thanks for watching as always. Like if you guys enjoyed the video, subscribe if you're new. I will see you next time.
Oh, shit. When we sat in the plane. Okay. Good luck. I'll be
I'm fucking dead, brother. Oh,
I'm
I just ate 4 mines!
Can I come up?
No!